There are names that survived when almost nothing else did. No crown, no castle, no written record of the man who first carried them into battle. Just a surname, passed from father to son, for over 1,000 years, until it landed, almost by accident, on a birth certificate in Ohio or Melbourne or Glasgow. For centuries, these names were treated as folklore. Colorful, untraceable, the kind of thing you'd find carved on a pub sign, not proven in a laboratory. Then geneticists went looking for the fingerprints hiding inside them. And what they found did not just confirm old family stories. It complicated them, deepened them, and in a few remarkable cases, connected total strangers across 4 continents to the same Bronze Age or early medieval man. Someone who lived, fought, and died long before surnames even existed as we understand them. This is the story of how a handful of rare Celtic surnames became something close to a genetic time capsule. Not myth, not marketing, a real, if incomplete, archive written into the Y chromosome, the one piece of DNA that, in most families, travels down the exact same line the surname does. For most of modern history, surnames were treated as cultural artifacts, not biological ones. Historians studied them for what they revealed about occupation, geography, or clan affiliation. A name like MacDonald pointed to descent, at least in theory, from a shared ancestor named Donald. A name like O'Neill implied membership in the O'Neill dynasty of Ulster. But implied was the operative word. Surnames in Gaelic Scotland and Ireland were assigned inconsistently for centuries. Some men took the name of a powerful lord for protection, not blood. Some clans absorbed outsiders through marriage, fosterage, or simple convenience. Adoption, illegitimacy, and political allegiance could all install a name in a family with no biological ancestor attached to it at all. So when genealogists began digging into these rare surnames, the assumption among many historians was reasonable skepticism. A shared name across Scotland, Ireland, and the diaspora was interesting. It was not proof of shared ancestry. It looked, on paper, like a closed case, cultural inheritance, not biological inheritance. That was the accepted story. And then researchers noticed something that did not fit. When population geneticists began sampling Y chromosome DNA across Ireland and Scotland in the early 2000s, they were not initially hunting for surnames at all. They were mapping general patterns of ancestry across the British Isles. But a strange signal kept appearing in their data. A specific, distinctive genetic marker, passed only from father to son, was showing up at unusually high frequency in a particular region of Ulster and the Scottish Highlands. Not evenly distributed, the way background genetic variation usually is. Clustered, concentrated, as if one man's Y chromosome had somehow outcompeted almost everyone else's in that part of the world. That was the first crack in the old assumption. A cluster like that does not happen randomly. It suggested that one individual at some point in history had left behind a genuinely enormous number of male descendants, enough to leave a visible signature in the modern population centuries later. And when researchers cross-referenced the geographic hotspot of that signature with the historical record, the region lined up almost perfectly with the traditional heartland of a single, immensely powerful medieval Irish dynasty. This is where the science had to earn its authority, because a coincidence in geography is not the same as proof in genetics. The tool that made the difference was the Y chromosome itself, a piece of the genome that almost never recombines. Unlike most of our DNA, which is a shuffled blend of both parents in every generation, the Y chromosome is passed down largely unchanged from father to son to grandson, accumulating only small mutations over long stretches of time. That makes it, in effect, a paternal line fingerprint. If 2 men share a rare, specific pattern on that chromosome, what researchers call a haplotype, the most likely explanation is a shared male ancestor, sometimes many centuries in the past. And because in most historical Gaelic and Scottish naming traditions the surname followed the same paternal line as the Y chromosome, researchers realized they had, for the first time, a way to actually test the old genealogical claims instead of simply repeating them. If you enjoy this kind of science-driven history, where DNA is used to test old legends instead of just decorate them, it's worth sticking around, because the deeper findings get stranger from here. researchers began systematically comparing men who shared certain rare surnames, testing whether their Y chromosome signatures clustered together far more than random chance would allow. In several cases tied to specific Gaelic dynasties, the results were striking. Men with surnames historically associated with these lineages, scattered from rural Ireland to the Scottish Islands to the descendants of famine-era emigrants in North America and Australia, shared the same distinctive genetic marker at rates that simply should not exist if the surname were pure cultural coincidence. But, and this is the part that kept scientists cautious, the data did not simply confirm the neat, single ancestor story either. It complicated it. In some surname groups, the vast majority of men shared a common paternal signature going back many centuries. In others, the same surname split into 2, 3, even 4 genetically distinct paternal lines, none of them closely related to each other at all. Same name. Same clan territory on old maps. Completely different biological ancestors. That was not a contradiction. It was a signal. And it forced researchers to consider several different explanations at once, none of them mutually exclusive. One explanation was straightforward. A single, unusually successful founder, a warrior, chieftain, or dynastic leader, whose descendants multiplied rapidly across generations, spreading the name and the Y chromosome together across an entire region. This is sometimes called a founder effect, and in societies where a single powerful bloodline controlled land, cattle, and marriage alliances for centuries, the biological maths of that kind of dominance is not far-fetched at all. A second explanation was cultural absorption without full genetic replacement. In Gaelic Ireland and Scotland, the practice of fosterage, sending sons to be raised by allied families, along with adoption into a clan for military or political protection, meant that men without any blood tie to a lineage could still legally and socially carry its name. Over centuries, this would blur a once clean genetic signal, producing exactly the kind of multiple, unrelated paternal lines researchers were now finding hidden under a single surname. A third possibility was quieter, and in some ways more unsettling, non-paternity events. Simply put, moments across the centuries where a son was not, biologically, the son of the man whose name he carried, through infidelity, remarriage, or circumstances lost entirely to history. Geneticists now believe this happens at a low but steady background rate in every population on Earth, and across 1,000 years, even a small rate compounds into a measurable effect. None of these explanations cancel each other out. In most of the rare surnames studied, the honest answer is a layered mixture of all three: a dominant founding lineage, diluted and complicated over centuries by fosterage, adoption, and the ordinary unpredictability of human relationships. The most important turning point in this entire field came when researchers moved beyond isolated surname studies and began comparing much larger datasets. Men from across Ireland, Scotland, and the wider Irish and Scottish diaspora tested for the same detailed set of Y chromosome markers and compared against medieval historical genealogies that claimed descent from specific named ancestors. This is where the science stopped being suggestive and became, in a few remarkable cases, close to definitive. One of the clearest findings involved a genetic signature linked to a powerful early medieval Irish dynasty whose descendants, according to surviving genealogies, spread across Ulster and into parts of Scotland. When researchers tested modern men carrying surnames historically tied to that dynasty, an extraordinarily high proportion, far beyond what random chance could explain, carried the same rare paternal marker. Researchers estimated that a signature like this, at that frequency, likely traces back to a single male ancestor who lived roughly in the early medieval period, a man whose documented reputation was, fittingly, as a prolific and dominant founder of a ruling lineage. The twist was not that a legendary warrior founder turned out to have many descendants. Genealogists had claimed that for 1,000 years. The twist was where the genetic trail did not stop. When researchers widened the comparison, that same rare marker did not stay neatly inside the expected surnames. It surfaced, in smaller but still statistically meaningful numbers, in surnames with no recorded genealogical connection to that dynasty at all, names historically tied to entirely separate clans, separate territories, even separate ends of Ireland and Scotland. Not through error. Through the messy, undocumented reality of medieval life: alliance, absorption, conquest, fosterage, and quiet family secrets that never made it into any written record. The genome, in other words, was not simply confirming the family trees written by medieval scribes. It was revealing an older, wider, and far less tidy story sitting underneath them, one written not in ink, but in the biological residue of every relationship, legitimate or otherwise, that produced a surviving male line. This matters far beyond 14 rare surnames on a list. It is a small, sharp example of a much larger truth about human history. Ancestry was never a clean, single-threaded rope running back through time. It was always a braid, thick in places, thin in others, occasionally knotted by events no documents survive to explain. The old model, where a surname meant a bloodline, meant a nation, meant a people, was simply too small a container for what actually happened to human beings over 1,000 years of war, migration, marriage, and survival. Picture the landscape where much of this began. The wind-scoured hills of Ulster and the Scottish Highlands, low stone walls dissolving into bracken, the Atlantic throwing itself against black cliffs for 10,000 years without asking anyone's permission. Somewhere in that landscape, in a century with almost no surviving written record of ordinary people, a man was born who would, without ever knowing it, leave a molecular signature inside millions of descendants scattered across a world he could not have imagined: Boston, Sydney, Toronto, a Y chromosome carried in the blood of men standing in cities that did not exist when he lived. He left no diary, possibly no grave anyone can name today. But something of him persisted anyway, encoded, patient, waiting in a piece of DNA too small to see and too durable to erase. That is the strange gift genetics has given family history. It cannot always tell you the story, but it can tell you with startling precision that a story is there, a real biological thread running back through the centuries, even when the names, dates, and details have long since been lost to time. If stories like this fascinate you, where a single strand of DNA reopens a chapter of history everyone assumed was closed, it's worth staying close, because there is far more hidden in the human past than most of us realize. What the rare surname studies ultimately reveal is not a simple triumph of science over legend. It is something more honest, and in its way more moving. The old genealogies were not lies. They were memories, shaped by pride, politics, and the limits of what any family could actually know about itself. The DNA does not erase those memories. It sits alongside them, sometimes confirming a claim that seemed too grand to be true, sometimes gently correcting it, and sometimes opening a door onto an ancestor no one had ever thought to look for. 14 rare surnames. 14 small threads pulled from a much larger tapestry of Gaelic and Scottish history. Behind each one is not a single clean answer, but a layered, living record of dominant lineages and quiet absorptions, of warriors whose success echoes in the blood of strangers, and of families who kept walking, generation after generation, carrying a name whose deepest meaning they never fully knew. The map we were given was never wrong, exactly. It was only ever a sketch. What the genome offers now is something closer to the terrain itself, older, stranger, and far more human than the story anyone was told growing up.